Hey everyone, Arbiter617 here with episode 4 of our Minecraft animation tutorial series using Blender. This episode will be finally covering animation. After all, it is an animation tutorial, and just now after all these episodes we'll finally be looking into the animation aspect. Just something I'd like to mention up front is, even though this is an episode on animation, don't expect to learn absolutely everything there is to know about animation and animating characters. This is something you can take an entire, school year learning this stuff and still have a lot to learn. I'm simply going to be showing you the tools you're going to be kind of needing to do the Minecraft animation. I'll be showing you how to work with rigs, how to set keyframes and stuff. And so one of the first things I'd like to jump right into is showing you a little bit about the keyframing and how to create keyframes in Blender. And for that I'm going to open a new scene simply because it's going to be easier to show it rather than in this crowded scene. If you already are familiar with keyframing things in Blender, you can probably skip ahead until we get back into the scene we were just in. So just skip ahead in the video until we're back in that scene. Otherwise, I will be showing you how to start animating things and how to make them move around in the scene. Okay, I just actually switched over to our default Minecraft scene simply because I wanted to have all the frame rate and everything all set up normally. So, if I create a cube, and we want to start moving around, the first thing we're going to want to do is start looking at the timeline. So far, we haven't worked with the timeline, and it's really simple. You can just scroll in, scroll out. If you middle mouse, click and drag, you can move forward and backwards. And this allows you to see basically frame numbers. And you can see the frame number we're on right here. You can see where it starts and where it ends. But so far it doesn't really, help us right now because nothing's really moving. So if we have our cube selected, and let me actually turn on screencast real quick, that way you can see what I'm typing. And if I press the I key, we can insert keyframes for all of these different values. So let's just say, let's insert a location keyframe. Let's move forward, maybe to frame 60, and maybe we'll move it to the side, we'll move it up, we'll hit the I button again, and we'll set another location keyframe. And now finally we have our first actual animation. It's not much, just a cube moving, but we have a cube moving from point A to point B in about 60 frames. Press the play button and watch it, and there it goes. Not exciting, but that's how to set keyframes. You can of course, then on top of this, let's maybe press I, and we'll set a rotation keyframe here. Maybe go after it ending and we'll rotate it. Hit I and hit another rotation keyframe. So now we have something that starts moving. Then right here the rotation gets keyframed and it'll start moving, and then right here it gets to the end. So, again, not very interesting, but that's basically how to set the keyframes. And one quick way to get rid of keyframes, if you don't want to have to undo, if you just want to actually get rid of something, if you move your oh sorry, I'll actually explain what I just did in a second. But if you move your little green line right on top of one of these yellow lines where you just create a keyframe, if you press Alt-I, it will delete the keyframe. So you use I to create the keyframe and Alt-I to delete the keyframe. And then the next thing I did, which I just did down in the timeline without explaining, is if you use the arrow keys, left and right, steps forward one frame or backwards one frame. So you can use that to, fine tune. You can just kind of get near the thing and then use this to get right on the, on the dot. And then the other useful keys is the up and down arrow. That will jump you to the forward or backwards keyframes. So between those, I use that a lot when animating. I use these to fine tune. I use the up and down like constantly to get between my keyframes. So let me just go through them and delete them all, and we'll go back to the beginning. So that was the first way of setting keyframes, by pressing the I. If you don't want to have to, constantly be setting them for different things and, be pressing I and clicking on things, this is how I first did things. I used to keyframe it and hit location, rotation, scale, I believe, back in the old 2015 tutorials. However, I quickly found that I'd press I and I would accidentally move my mouse a little bit, and I'd click on something like visual location and I'd set a weird keyframe, then it would get messed up. So the next thing you can do is down here in the keying set. If we click on this, we'll see, oh hey, it's like the same things we were just looking at. So what I like to do is maybe change this to something like location, rotation, scale. Yes, you won't be really doing much scaling when we're working in Minecraft animation. You're mostly just locating and rotating. But just for beginners, it's good to start with that. And now if I press I, it no longer asks us anything. It just simply sets the keyframe for all of those location, rotation, and scale. And again, an advanced animator might say, oh, you don't need to do all those. You can just get away with a few, but for starters it works. Now you can see we can easily keyframe different things. Then I'll move it around, press I, and now we have things moving around. Okay, so it's getting a little more interesting. One thing I want to mention up here at this front, when doing tutoring for different people who are doing animation, one of the most common things I see when people are first starting, so I want to just kind of reinforce this right now, is when you want things to hold still, you have to remember to set the second keyframe at the end. And what I mean by that is, okay, let's say we want them to start out 20 seconds just holding still. Or sorry, not 20 seconds, 20 frames. So a little bit less than a second. So we'll go to 20 frames. Sorry, I'm getting this messed up. We'll hit I to insert. Let's say he'll go, a few frames later, he'll move over. We'll hit I to insert. We want him to stay there for a little while. Then we want him to like move over to this corner. What people do, they forget to set another keyframe, so they go ahead and we go, okay, now I'm going to go over to this tree. Even though there's not a tree there, but whatever. Pretend there's a tree. So then he goes over there, but the problem is they never set another keyframe here, so they'll get there and it'll instantly go off to the next place. So you have to remember, if you want something to hold still, you have to, once it's holding still, you have to go forward, and right before it starts moving again, you have to set the new keyframe in the exact same spot and then move it. Otherwise, it's not going to hold still because you never told it to. So now it goes there. So now we have two keyframes, both of which are the exact same, they're 35 frames apart. So for those 35 frames, it'll sit perfectly still and then start moving off. So I just want to mention that because that's one thing that I see a lot of people doing. So another way of looking at our keyframes, rather than down here in the timeline, is in the dope sheet. And for that, we will go up here next to default and we will change this to animation. And you will see all these little things. Right now I just actually deleted, I actually should have left those keyframes on. Let me actually move things around real quick. I'll move it, rotate around, go, I'm used to having auto keyframe on, which I'll be talking about in just a moment. So move it around, and we got some stuff. So there's lots of complicated things that look all scary. Oh, there's all these crazy curves. Don't worry about those. But up here is the dope sheet, and here we can see the same, every time there's one of these little yellow lines, there is something up here in the dope sheet. And what we can do then is that gives us control over actually manipulating the keyframes. Down here, you can't really do much other than, delete it and get rid of it. Up here, however, we can take that keyframe, which is that one down there. We can press G, just like when you're in the 3D viewport. You can move it around. You can press B to box select multiple. Then you can press G to move all of those around. So if you can move them all around the timeline, you see them moving down there. Another really handy thing is to press S. You can scale them together. It scales it around the green line, so you can scrunch them in, so you make it move faster. You can, grab this keyframe and say, okay, I want another one of these keyframes over here. You can shift D to duplicate it, make another one. Maybe we want it to go back to this point, so we'll duplicate that one. So it'll start here, go there, hold, and come back. And I'm just basically showing you some of the basics on these controls. I know right now you're probably thinking, oh, what are all these things? How are we going to use this Minecraft animation? And we'll get to that, be patient. I just want to make sure I cover absolutely everything up front. That way, as you start animating, you'll be like, how do I, duplicate a keyframe? You'll be like, oh wait, I remember him showing that. So I want to just get this going up front. So the other thing to mention is you don't have to be constantly pressing I to set the keyframes. If I start deleting some of these, the next thing we can do, oh, it's not even deleting them, whatever, I'll just delete them out of here. The next thing we can do is turn on auto keyframe, and this is what I honestly always have on. And what that means is if I grab the cube, I press G, I move it, it automatically created the keyframe. I didn't even have to press I or anything. Basically, if I change anything, if I rotate anything, if I scale anything, it automatically is going to be keyframing all of it, whether or not I did anything else to it. And what I would also like to turn on is this automatic keyframe using active keying set. I like having both those on. I don't personally fully understand those. I just find that it works a little better. It ends up creating more of the keyframes you want and not skipping out on them. So the way I animate is auto keyframe pretty much always on, that on, and I leave this. I actually usually leave this to location rotation. However, for this tutorial, we'll leave it on scale too. That way you don't have to handle scaling separately, which is how I do it. I usually handle scaling separately. And one of the final things, I guess, is, before we get to the Minecraft scene and start working, is so far whenever we set two keyframes, it always starts out slow, speeds up, and then slows back down. And the reason for that is, let me actually get a better example. The reason for that is, let's have the cube simply move just along this green arrow, okay? It's just moving along the green Y axis. And what you'll notice is, if we look in this graph editor, which we haven't looked in yet, if we scale this up a little bit, let me try to click on the edge. Click right there, got it. If we pull that up, pull this, this is a little 2-pixel thing you gotta click on to get good at accuracy. Playing Blender, you'll be good at first-person shooters after all this. Anyway, if we go in here, we can see on the left side, if we have our cube selected, we can expand these little things, look inside our location rotation, and here's all the different things we keyframed. We didn't just keyframe one thing, we keyframed its X, Y, Z location, X, Y, Z rotation, blah blah blah, and X, Y, Z scale. And as you can see, one of these, moves and curves up. And what you'll be doing in the graph editor, which we'll be looking at more later, we can hide all these. If you simply click and drag down them, you can hide them all, or you can just click that to hide them or bring them all back. I usually just click and drag because it's kind of fun watching them all go whoop, disappear. But if we hide them all, and we just want to look at the Y location, because we dragged along the Y location. And as you can see, we have this, again I'm pressing A to select everything. The A thing works everywhere. A works in the viewport, A works in the dope sheet, and A works in here. Just unselect everything, or select everything. So by default we have this starting slow, speeding up, and slowing back down, which is how all animation is by default. If we grab this keyframe up here and we press T, we can change it from the default, which is Bezier, to linear, and now you'll see this curve no longer is like a smooth, speed up smooth. Now it's just a perfect line, and in the viewport we see that the cube moves perfectly smooth. It moves and it stops. And sometimes you're going to want that, honestly. If you want to just, have an arrow flying past the scene, you don't want it to start slow on the edge of the screen, speed up and slow down, it's going to look really fake. You just want to see like an arrow zip by. Or I use this a lot for camera animation actually as well, like having just the camera constantly kind of panning along or something. So that covers most of the basics. We'll be looking actually at a lot more of some of these buttons, and I'll be showing you how to navigate this more. I'll be talking a lot more about the dope sheet and stuff once we have more stuff in the scene. Right now we only have a cube, so there's not really much to show. I just wanted to get those very basic concepts down, so we know, where the dope sheet is, we know how to move keyframes. That way I don't have to kind of re-explain this all. So let's close this down and get back to our scene. So at this point, now that we've pretty much covered the basics, I'm just going to start animating. I'm going to show you kind of how to do everything as I do it. This is obviously going to take a really long time, but I'd like to just go as far into the scene as I can before I've kind of felt like I've shown you everything. And then, unlike kind of the previous tutorials, I don't actually have anything else mapped out at this point. I actually have a little sheet of paper in front of me that I usually kind of read off of when I'm doing these tutorials. However, right here is just a big squiggly line that tells me to start animating, so that's what I'm going to be doing. It might be a little bit less organized because there's nothing else to really cover, but hopefully by actually just doing the animation naturally, you'll actually learn more than if I'm just kind of telling you principles. So hopefully it works. If it doesn't, sorry. I'll try to make amends later. Anyway, let's click on the rig and we'll get going. If we click on this character rig that we brought in before, we see down here that we're in object mode. We can go to pose mode, or a shortcut, which I would recommend learning just so you don't have to keep going down there every time, because you'll be going in and out of rigs a lot. If we click on the rig and do Control Tab, it'll take you to the rig mode. Again, this is something that we looked at earlier when setting up the face. And again, I mentioned back then that we didn't need to know about this stuff much yet, but now we do, because we'll be moving around. A bit about the character and how to kind of move things around. I'll kind of show you the different rotations and way you kind of pose the character. So starting from, let me start from the head. Let's just start from the head. The main thing you're going to be using is all these little bones. Is if you press R, it will rotate it. You can crack your head around. If we press, G, we can rip it off. Not that we are going to want that, but that's another option. Sometimes actually I do move the shoulders up a little bit. If I have someone like shrug, I can actually kind of pull them off a little bit. So we press R. However, that's not too useful because it just rotates, like this. What if we want to rotate it forward? Well, if we press R and then we want to rotate around that red line, we want to kind of pretend the red line sticking through it and rotate around it. We'll press R, and press X, and now it'll rotate forward. oh hey, that's cool. You can press the same thing with the head. You know, grab the head and press R, Z to look left and right. We can hit R, Y to kind of tilt it, so we can rotate around an axis, which is handy. However, one thing you'll notice, okay, let's now say we take the character and we have him like staying at an angle. Now we're no longer able to rotate around the X because, you know, it's gonna go the wrong way. However, if you hit R, X, and then X again a second time, so you hit R, X, X, now it's rotating around the local X, which means no matter which way it's facing, it's still gonna do that. I think for the head, if we want to rotate it, I think it's R, Y, Y. Yeah, Y, Y does left and right. Z, Z does kind of left and side. So you just start kind of learning these things. I use the R, X, X stuff a lot for kind of the arms, but mostly I actually just kind of use the viewport, rotate things a little bit, you know, rotate that way, you change the viewport. And one of the other things I mentioned last tutorial, that in that last tutorial I mentioned I don't really use it, is if you press RR, you can kind of just free rotate things. And at first, I honestly thought this was really useless. Last tutorial I mentioned how useless I thought it was. What's funny is since that tutorial, this turned into being like one of the most useful things. I pretty much always use this now. You can, between moving the camera and hitting RR, you can pretty much always get like the pose you want simply by, you know, moving the camera, hitting RR, getting something close to what you want, moving to another angle, hitting RR, and we're just constantly rotating things around. One place you might want to actually press G, so far we've been doing a lot of R's, but we're going to want to press G on like the bottom of the hip if we want to make him squat down. And one thing you might have noticed if you're playing around following along is we can't actually rotate the legs. And the reason for that is because the legs are controlled a little differently. Because we want the legs to stay on the ground, the legs are controlled by these little things down here, little squares around them. And if we press G to move them, that's how you position the feet. The feet are all or the legs are controlled by pressing G on the bottoms. Everything else is pretty much controlled by R. So, enough talk, let's actually start animating. Let's put him back behind we're gonna have him come out of the doorway. So, thing one, I'm going to, actually thing one, the way I would do it is thing one, set up some camera work, because this is why I wanted to actually go through a real animation this time, because now you're actually going to see, you know, the way I really do things rather than me just talking. Because if some people ask me, like, oh, how do you know, what do you just do first? Do you do camera first? Do you plan out first? Well, now you're going to know, because I'm actually going to be creating an animation. So apparently the first thing I do is the camera, because that's what I instinctively went to. So I went into the camera, and one thing you might have noticed I did down here when I was talking was I instinctively always change the start frame to 0. It just kind of bothers me that it's not like that. One other thing about the timeline I figured I'd mention that I saw right now is if you ever get annoyed that your cursor keeps going into this area past where your animation ends, if you turn the lock on, that lock will prevent it from going further. Okay, yeah, and so now down here, we're actually, you know, instinctively I turned back on the auto keyframe. I saw that that wasn't on, and this wasn't set to location rotation. Maybe I will do location rotation. Now I'll keep it in scale, because that's how I have it. Anyway, so we got the camera set up, and we're gonna maybe get a shot of. Okay, first of all, I noticed it's very zoomed out. So I'm gonna have maybe I want to get some water, get kind of a good revealing shot, kind of panning down. So we'll start the camera here, and sometimes when you're first starting animating, I know it's really difficult to get a sense of how many frames forward should I go. But when in doubt, count it out. Think about, okay, I want this first shot to be looking down, it's like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, and kind of pans in maybe a little bit more than 3 seconds. Well, we know that we're going at 30 frames per second, so if we want to be a little more than 3 seconds, 3 seconds would be 90 frames, so honestly, let's just go to frame 100. We have the camera selected, we have auto keyframe turned on, and with auto keyframe turned on, all we have to do is move the camera to new location, and boom, we have our first little bit of animation. The camera comes in and pans down. So remember just a moment ago when I was talking about the dope sheet, let's go into our animation, and it opens up this whole new viewport. Let's kind of set things up again. Let's go back to our camera in this viewport, because the animation viewport's a little different. Let's change it back to material, Let's turn our world back on. It's nice to see that. Another thing you can do, I didn't mention this elsewhere in the tutorial. If you're just playing around in the scene and you're not really doing hard work and you have a good computer, you can turn on ambient occlusion, which kind of helps you see things a little more. I actually kind of like it. If it starts slowing your computer down though, I'd turn that back off. It's just nice to see things. Anyway, in the camera settings here, we want this to probably be linear. We don't want it to start slow, speed up, and then slow down. So I would just grab all these keyframes, press T, set it to linear. Now we have our opening shot. It's kind of panning down. Oh, there's a house down there. And I may even kind of clean this up a little bit. Just kind of, I don't know, whatever. It's just kind of a revealing shot. And then, so now we're gonna, okay, oh, sorry. See, I really am gonna have to get in the habit of explaining absolutely everything I do. I'm just so instinctively doing things. So, we have our starting frame and our next frame. And again, you can use the up and down arrow to jump between them. So for me, I always animate with one camera. I just find it simpler. You don't get lost with multiple cameras. You don't have to kind of be worrying about, if you want to make changes to one, you don't have to shift everything else around. You can just deal with one. And the way you switch between shots with one camera is as simple as go to the end of one shot by, you going the up arrow, you're right on the frame, go forward one frame by pressing the right arrow, and now we'll move our camera. Simple as that. So now when you play it, it gives the illusion of, okay, it's going along and cuts to a new shot. So maybe the first shot was kind of a far away of the house, and then this one's going to be more of like a close-up. Let's go forward a little bit. So here we have it looking good. However, we realize shot 2 is way too short. So again, the dope sheet, we can now pull keyframes over. One thing you might notice, if you didn't want to make these cameras linear, let's say you wanted to actually leave them as the Bezier, so you have it, start smooth, you want to speed up. One thing you'll notice is whenever you have camera cuts, it really messes up right between them. You see how it like speeds up and jumps, and that's one of the reasons I like leaving my cameras linear by default. So I like to usually kind of start mapping out my shots. So another thing we can do is we don't want all the focal lengths the same, otherwise things look kind of plain. So we have a revealing shot at the beginning. Let's go into our camera settings, and right here with the focal length, right at the last frame, I'm going to set that, right click it. We can insert keyframes on any of these values. So I'm going to go forward a frame, maybe bring this up to like 24. And because I have auto keyframe on it, automatically set the keyframe. So now it will jump from 18 to 24 between those shots. What I'm trying to do is get like a nice view of the carrots. So we're finally all set up for him to walk out. So let's go to right kind of before he walks out. So it'll kind of cut to the shot. Wait just a little moment, then he's going to come out. So right about here, we're going to have him come out the door. So he has no keyframes on him yet. Let's start by pulling him back here with the little pad. And we'll see we created the first keyframe because we have auto keyframe turned on. And let's have him open the door. So I would probably animate the door opening first because that's more of like a major timing event. So it cuts, and then a moment later let's set a keyframe. So if we want to set a keyframe exactly how it is, we can just hit R to rotate, and without even moving the mouse, just left click, it'll automatically set the keyframe because we're in auto keyframe. And then let's go forward maybe just 12 frames or so. Hit R, hit Z to rotate around the Z, and let's open the door. So now it goes, cuts, he's going to open the door. And we're going to want him to walk out. And walking is one of the things that I actually have a whole tutorial on my personal channel for it. I would recommend watching some kind of walking tutorial. It's a very different thing. It'd take a very long time to go over, as demonstrated by the fact that I made an entire tutorial for it. So I'm not going to get into it too much here. We're more looking at the tools you need. So he opens the door, and let's just kind of pull him out a little bit. And pull his pad out, and you'll see. Okay, well, we need to move him over here before the door opens. So he kind of goes slow, pushes the door, and he comes walking out. We might need to pull this point. Oh, we might need to move this keyframe back or forward more because he kind of sped up a little weird. So this is the next good moment to mention that if we click on this button right here, it will only show the keyframes for what you have currently selected, which is really handy because it makes it you don't see all these other things, and you don't get lost. You're not trying to. I used to not know about that, and I'd be like, okay, I just want to move the root over. This thing would get huge. You'd be scrolling. But once I learned about that, I'm like, oh, boom, that's all you need. So if we want to move that root forward, isolate it, pull that over. There he goes. He walks out. And this is honestly how I animated a lot of stuff at first. I just kind of mapped the camera, mapped the timing. We want him to start out really slow. I'd like to start going into some of the other things though. As I'm doing this, I'm starting to realize that this might start getting a little boring, and I'm not really covering the things you need to cover fast enough. This might start getting a little too long. So I'm going to try to focus more on things you're going to need to know rather than detailing it. But we have him coming up, opening. We'll do the walk later. But let's start actually kind of moving around. Let's pretend he's walking. And I'm just going to start animating some other stuff just so we get an idea. We're starting to move along. I don't want to, go into this forever, or otherwise the tutorial's going to be massive. There's not too much more. I'm not going to show you, animating the whole thing. That's going to take me. It's going to take me a whole week. I'm hoping to get this thing done, by next week. But what I want to start showing you now is some of the different things we can do now that we have a little more of an interesting scene, and that is some of the tools that, like one I just used there. If we ever want to reset something, see how he's kind of like. Let's say he's like hunched over. We want to reset the rotation. If we do Alt-R, it'll reset rotation. If we want to reset the feet, because that was something we used G, we'll have to do Alt-G. So we're going to reset his feet. You pull him out a little bit. One of the other things handy is if we have him, let's say he comes out, or let's kind of go back in time maybe. Let's say he was a little bit crooked in here, and we want to kind of move him straight backwards, but the arrows aren't pointing the right way. If we change this global to local, now we can see those arrows, so we can kind of move him. Comes in, opens the door. So we're already starting to, we don't have the feet working yet. And again, the reason I'm not doing the feet is because it's like a whole walk cycle type thing. But we're already seeing, we're creating some sort of animation. If I were to take the feet and just start kind of doing like a little shuffle. He comes out and doot. And then maybe the camera we want to kind of tilt up. And maybe he looks over. And all these things can be animated. The eyes can be animated. We can have him kind of look over to the right. Have him starting out looking that way. He looks right. And then he looks over this way. Looks out to the sky. We can animate the mouth to kind of open up a little more. Go back in time, close it a little bit so it opens. We'll take like the side of the mouth, smile it, go back in time, Alt-G it to close it so he comes out, and he smiles. So we're already starting to get like, some basic animation. It's just a matter of, it looks really junky right now because, because I didn't do anything to it. But you get the idea. I'm deleting these keyframes on the feet. I saw the feet kind of jerk to the side, so I'm going to clear those so he doesn't kind of jerk anymore. So we got some of those basics. I'm showing you some basic commands. That actually doesn't look that bad anymore for just a really basic hop out. So here's an important time now I can start talking about the dope sheet more. Now that we isolated only one, we can only see like, his torso or his arm or his lower arm. If we double tap A on the rig, here we go. Now we can see all of his little keyframes. So I press A to unselect everything here. Now we have all these different things. We can see, here's his head. Let's grab the head and say, I want it to turn over sooner. We can move the head around. We can take the eye locator. We can place all these things. And one thing to learn that's very handy is, rather than all these individual things, if you want to, box select all of them, you can also simply, this thing up here, the little summary, these keyframes here, like that one, these are basically saying, there's a keyframe somewhere below it for this rig. So for example, if I select all of these, that in turn is actually selecting everything. If I just select these, it's going to select, everything in that, right there. So you can use that little summary row by pressing, B to box select it. And you can do things like speed stuff up and slow it down. Let's say, the door opening was good, but starting right here, he kind of hurried out a little fast. So we take that right here, starting right about here. We're going to box select everything beyond that point, or just box select the summary, exact same thing. We press S, scale it out. Now he walks out a little slower. Maybe the turn we want to be fast again, so we'll kind of speed that back up. And that's kind of how I do a lot of my animating. I just kind of speed things up and move around. Maybe he comes out and maybe get a different shot of him kind of admiring the day. And remember, okay, so I want to lower the I want to lower the focal length. Goodness, I cannot speak tonight. I want to lower the focal length beyond this point. So we can't simply change the focal length less, because if I were, okay, let's bring it down to 24. The problem is we didn't set the keyframe before it, and that was one of the things I mentioned kind of when I was in that blank scene talking about if you want something to hold, you have to set the other keyframe. So here, if we have it around 36, you can't just go ahead and cut it down to less and expect it to work. You have to go to the frame right before it, keep it at 36, then you can let it cut down. And here we hit the edge of our timeline, so let's just extend it by extending the end time. And just gonna move the camera around a little bit. So just kind of coming out, and maybe that's a kind of short shot, so we'll extend it. So by now, honestly, I've already shown you most of the basics of animating. I've showed you the, the dope sheet, turning on the isolate select. This, I literally leave this on all the time now. I used to not know about that. Ever since learning about it, I always keep it on. Another thing I would recommend turning on is the ghost button. It's hard to explain why you need it. However, if you ever start keyframing visibilities, that's where it becomes really handy. Because if you hide something from the visibility, it won't show up in the dope sheet. However, for some reason you can still like select its keyframes, but you can't see it. And I've ended up moving things around, really kind of messing stuff up before. So I always leave that on. I leave the isolate selected on. I leave the auto keyframe on, location, rotation, or whatever. And that's basically how we start, moving along. One of the other things I'll mention is maybe the curve editor real quick, because we haven't really looked too much into it. Let's say, let's bring in a new character now. I'm going to bring in the bunny. And one thing important to remember is, now that I brought in the bunny, I have to go out of pose mode in order to, go find him. But also, I actually might have automatically turned it off out of instinct, but if we bring in the bunny, if we have auto keyframe still turned on, this is where I always forget about it. If I append something new and say, okay, let's bring him over to the scene, I forget to turn off auto keyframe, and whoops, wouldn't you know it, we accidentally just set a keyframe on him because we have auto keyframe turned off. So always turn that off whenever you're appending things and just kind of, whoops, moving them into the scene. And another thing while I'm setting up the bunny is this little viewport up here. We haven't really used this. What we can do with this to make it actually useful is if we press 0, then we see, okay, it sees what our camera sees. We bring this little plus thing up so we see the bottom. We can change this into material, and the reason I was able to move is I was scrolling. So now we have it in material. So now we can actually see what our camera sees while we're in the viewport doing different things, which is useful. Like now, we can basically watch the movie while we're kind of setting things up and get two different views at once. And if you want to go the extra distance and really make it movie-like to see kind of what you're really going to see, is if we press N and we go down, it's kind of hard to see, but if we go down to display, we can set it to only render, and that won't show all the little controllers and stuff on his face. So we can really start getting a sense for, what the animation is going to look like, and that's usually how I leave things. Okay, so I actually realized the bunny wasn't actually the best example to show what I wanted to show. So what I wanted to explain was that we can also keyframe things to bounce and behave a little differently. I wanted to show the bunny hopping, but let's show this cube landing. Let's say we want this cube to start up here. We want it to fall down and hit the ground, bounce back up a little bit, and then come back down and land. So we'd expect it to, hit the ground and quickly boing, bounce back up. However, earlier, we mentioned it starts slow, speeds up, then slows down, boom. And that seems like a very, very squishy bounce. Normally when you want things, bouncing, you want it to like boop, pop back up. But if we go into the graph editor, and if we press A to select all these curves, and then we press the F key, remember in episode 1 of this tutorial, we showed you that you can press F so you can, zoom in on things. And I told you how to add F as the shortcut. We looked at F for the 3D view as well as the graph editor, and this is why we want it for the graph editor, because now we can grab all these, press F to zoom in on them. And we have the cube bouncing up and down, so that's bouncing along the Z. All we want to see is the Z. And as you can see here, this blue, which is the same color as the Z, that's the one where we have some motion to it. So we can, expand these little things over here. Let's hide everything. We can hide them either by, clicking on them, or we can click and drag downwards. We hid everything but the Z location. We want to get a better view on this. So again, now that we just see the Z location, let's hit A, hit F to zoom in it. And here we go. Now we can see that's what it's doing, going whoop and bouncing up and down. And the principle I wanted to show is called breaking tangents, or pressing or freeing them, however you want to call them. If you right click a tangent, hit V, you can go to free, and this will allow us to move these handles such that we get a sharp point. When it's not free, if I were to, move this around, it moves the other side. You can't move one without moving the other. However, freeing the tangents, we can get something like this. And for something that's bouncing, this is kind of what you're going to want. Or maybe I'll break this tangent as well. We'll have something like that. So now we have it go down, boom, and it bounces up nicely. So that was a principle I wanted to explain because I use this a whole lot. Let's say we don't even have the bounce. Let's just say this is a sword that he's dropping on the ground. You don't want it to speed up, slow down, and land. You want the sword just to kind of literally come to a plopping stop. So it goes, you want just to land on the ground. I use breaking tangents for that, as well as sometimes when characters are doing jumps, lands, flipping. Earlier I mentioned the personal tutorials on my personal channel, and I have a flip tutorial where I break tangents a lot in order to have people, land on the ground. But anyway, that's how to break tangents, or just free them, and that's kind of why you'd use them. Hopefully this was a little more helpful than the bunny example I tried yesterday, which I cut out now. That is pretty much the basics of all the animation. I was when I set out to make this tutorial, I was hoping I'd get through like, a good 1/3 of the animation or half of it, but honestly I'm probably going to redo all this on my own. I don't think I work well when doing tutorials because I'm doing things where I'm trying to explain them, not so much how I actually do them, but I'm realizing if I do everything the way I actually do them, it could be a good, hour or two before I show half the things I want to show. One thing I will mention though, because I haven't gone over this yet, I just realized one thing we'll absolutely be needing later is parenting things. So let me see, again, I turned off auto keyframe because I knew I'm about to append something. Let's append in a carrot. We have a carrot in the scene. Let's go put it in his hand. And one thing you're going to need if you ever want him using a hoe or weapon or holding something is we can parent it to his hand by, if we put it kind of on his hand, let's click on his rig real quick. Let's go into pose mode on his rig. So now we're in pose mode. So now if I click on the carrot, and now that because I was in pose mode last on the rig before I clicked out of it, now that means if I click on the carrot, hold shift and right click his lower arm, now we clicked on the arm bone, not the arm rig but the arm bone, and we have the carrot still selected as well. We do Control P and we can parent the carrot to that bone, and now you'll see the carrot's in his hand. However, we don't want the carrot always in his hand. So this is another thing people always ask me, oh, how do you pick something up or put it in his hands? We don't want it there at the beginning. We want him to come out, the bunny hops over, and then maybe go forward a frame, and maybe he pulls out a carrot out of his pocket. Again, this isn't actually what I'm going to be doing in the animation, but for the purpose of showing you these, which is why I'll probably end up just animating this all differently. So he's going to reach behind him, he's going to kind of reach into his pocket. So he's going to kind of reach behind him, and I'm going to have him pull out a carrot. So what I like to do now, what I find works nicely, is, okay, first of all, let's just say you wanted the carrot to suddenly be in his hand, but not here earlier. One way you can do that is if we have the carrot selected, we go to over our outliner, we press the numpad period, it goes right to our carrot. We can keyframe the visibility, go back a frame, turn it off, keyframe it, or if we have auto keyframe, automatically keyframed, and then we'll see the carrot appears right when that appears. That's one way. If you keyframe the visibility, you also have to keyframe the render. Otherwise, if we, right now it's visibility hidden, but if we were to render, we would actually still see the carrot. So you also have to keyframe that to turn on as well. I personally don't like that as much. I find that got a little more annoying. So what I started doing was keyframing the scale, and we can do that in a few different ways. The easiest way is just press N, go into its scale right here. That's weird, the scale's should be set to 1, but whatever. But we could have something like this, and let's go back to here, right when you're about to pull it out. And if I click and drag down on these values, we can drag all of them at once. We'll hit 0, so scale 0. And then we'll right click it, hit insert keyframes, and it'll insert all the keyframes. And go right to when we want it out. Click and drag down them. What was this, like 0.92 or something? Then it's got the carrot. And because I have auto keyframe on, and we had a keyframe set, that set the keyframe. So now it's not in his hand. And then whoop, it pops into his hand. He's got a carrot now. So we can use that to scale things up. But so you can do that. And you can also set you can set the keyframes of the scale 1 frame apart. If you want something just to pop in, you can have it just like appear. But we'll use that for most things. One thing to mention with this is, let's say later on in this animation I'm going to have him pick up something like the chest. If we want like a version that's not parented and a version that is, I use the scale technique as well. I'll have him walk up to this chest, which isn't parented to him. If he moves around and if he bends his body, the chest doesn't move. And what I'll also do, I'll have another version of the chest, which is scaled down to 0, which was in his hands the whole time. Then he'll walk up to this one. The one that was in his hands will scale up. This one will scale down, so it'll basically be replaced by the other one. You won't notice it. The viewer won't notice it because they look identical. And again, I might show you some of these things in the beginning of next episode. I'll show you all the stuff I've animated. I will also be giving you the scene file at the end, in the end of next episode. But I believe I covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I showed you how to do all the animation. I showed you how to press R to rotate. I showed you how to double tap R to do the local things. I showed you the dope sheet. I showed you how to set things to linear or Bezier. I showed you a little bit about this. I showed you the summary that we can use to, box select things. And then if you box select those and pull things around, we can retime things. I showed you that's most of the things I need to show: how to parent things, how to break the tangents. But I believe that's it. I might find out later that there's something I skipped, but I'll simply cover that next episode. And next episode is the final episode. I'll finally be showing you how to render everything out. This scene's going to be vastly different next episode, and I'll be covering everything kind of that I changed. But with what I showed you now, you honestly should have enough to pretty much take it and go with it now. I showed you how to set all the keyframes and everything. So thank you for watching. And kind of as my final advice before I end this episode, I'd like to really kind of encourage you, if you want to do animations, just start animating, just start making stuff. Don't be afraid. I know a lot of people when they're first starting out, they're very afraid to mess things up. They don't want to start, moving the character if they do it wrong. The only way you're really going to learn it is if you just start doing it. In fact, doing things wrong and wasting like a bunch of hours doing something and then finding out that you kind of messed up, did it the wrong way, it's not really hours wasted. Those were hours spent, trying things one way, learning what didn't work. And you'll probably have also picked up a lot of tricks and gotten better at it. So just start working at it, start animating things, start moving stuff around. You'll find things that don't work. And if something messes up, just start experimenting around, look into it. Anyway, I'm going to let you go now. Thanks again for watching. My name's Arbiter617, and we'll see you next episode. So, as I mentioned multiple times in this episode, is that if you're enjoying these tutorials, and you want to learn more, please be sure to check out my personal channel. I have a bunch of other little small, quick Minecraft tips and tutorials on more specific things, and I'll be talking about those very briefly next episode.